When did you first realize that you existed? Think about that for a minute. Sit down somewhere and actually try to remember. Maybe you were 3, 4, or even up to 5 years old. Regardless, you had many interactions with the external world prior to springing into self-awareness. You were not just functioning merely on reflexes and instincts. Can you actually recall anything from your infancy? Let's try this. Can you repeat everything I just said from the beginning? If you can't, don't worry about it. If you rewatch this with the intent to memorize and recite what you heard, you will actually do so. Hopefully now you understand the difference between the mind and consciousness. And so what if the time period from before you were born up until you finally sprang into self-awareness is what animals experience all the time? All mammals have brains, and so they have their own mind. They have their own thoughts. They dream like we do, but we kill and eat animals despite them being sentient, conscious creatures. The obvious justification that we make is that we eat animals for survival. However, we can minimize the suffering of the animal and make their death as quick and painless as possible. We simply feel better about it. Just make them unconscious somehow and then kill them. And if that's the case, is it ever okay to kill anyone or anything when they're not conscious? The strongest argument against cannibalism is that human life is inherently more valuable than that of an animal. If we're in an apocalypse scenario, we have a moral obligation not to resort to cannibalism. We kill animals for food and survival. The trait in question we will fixate on today is consciousness. The mind is responsible for perception, memories, personality traits, reasoning, and imagination. As for consciousness, the funny thing is we can't actually figure out what consciousness actually is.
It is estimated that between 95 through 97% of the animal kingdom does not have a heart and a brain, as most animal species are invertebrates. Despite this, there are some interesting examples of these species functioning in a way that suggests there is a mind at work.
First, let's take a quick visit to the world of botany, which is the study of plants. Do you know some trees have fights with each other over space and territory? Here's an example. The eucalyptus trees engage in allelepathy, which is chemical warfare. And these trees eliminate neighboring plants with toxic oils that they release from their leaves, which eliminates the seed germination of other plants. These trees are highly flammable due to their oil and they can literally explode under high temperatures. However, their stem is hidden deep inside their trunk and they can bounce back, making them the only trees remaining.
Here's another example. Fig trees have a unique relationship with wasps. The wasps need food from the plant, so they worked out a deal, and it goes like this. The wasp will lay its eggs inside the unripe figs and pollinate the flowers inside. When the larvae hatch, the larva will eat the fig's internal tissue and sugar. The wasp is expected to pollinate the fruit so the tree can reproduce. Otherwise, the tree can't reproduce without the wasp. However, if the wasp fails to pollinate the fruit, the tree will simply terminate all the larvae inside by dropping the fruit, with the larvae still inside, and they will starve to death. Let's take a look at the world of ants. We often think of ant colonies as being complex in their design. I will admit there is something fascinating about ants all over the world, digging tunnels, and doing so in a way as to prevent the tunnels from collapsing in loose dirt. They have their storage rooms, a nursery for larvae, the queen's chamber, and even a graveyard. These so-called underground cities are made without a single architect, never mind an architect, not even a blueprint. And they do this all over the world, with the exception of Antarctica. There isn't a single instruction manual they follow, and instead they have these hardwired instincts and operate under collective intelligence. They follow each other's scent, or pheromones, and they recognize the necessary tasks required when they find themselves in certain areas as they follow chemical trails.
And truthfully, the ants aren't always operating in a functional way. We can observe them following each other around in circles, placing food or other items in the wrong area, and they're constantly bumping into each other. They will do this repeatedly for hours, for days even. This can be compared to electric football when you leave the figurines unattended. Nevertheless, these ant colonies that we refer to as complex civilizations are an example of emergence in nature. Water molecules build these complex looking snowflakes through these interactions. Or how about a murmuration of starlings flying together to form waves in the sky? And then there's mimicry. That is when an organism takes the appearance of another, using a wolf in sheep's clothing approach in attracting prey. The mimorachne is a jumping spider that takes the appearance of an ant. This spider invades an ant's nest to eat the larva in order to gain the sense of the colony. This makes the spider virtually untraceable. The spider simply uses mimicry as a form of defense to protect itself, in essence actually trying to hunt down the ants.
The robber fly does use mimicry to make itself appear as a bumblebee to capture honeybees. Since honeybees aren't native to North America, the robber fly only managed to evolve in such a way to resemble the bumblebee. Unlike the spider ant, the fly does rely on its appearance and sound. Those were examples of insects using deception that requires premeditation. Let's talk about marine life. Jellyfish don't have hearts, and they also don't have brains. How are they alive? In short, they have a collective of nerves that forms a nerve net. Because of this, they can respond to stimuli.
If something doesn't have a heart and a brain, can it be considered alive? What is the definition of life? First, living things are made of cells. They initiate growth and cellular division. Some living things can be made of just one cell. Second, living organisms process energy. Living things also grow and develop. Living things also respond to stimuli. Jellyfish are most definitely alive, despite lacking a heart and a brain.
The octopus has 3 hearts and 9 brains. Well, not exactly. An octopus has one central brain, and each of its arms contains dense neural circuitry. Each arm can process touch, taste, and movement, and the octopus runs on distributed intelligence. And so this doesn't mean 9 different sets of consciousness, which is disturbing to think about. The 8 tentacles are semi-autonomous. The main brain can override all 8 tentacles if necessary. According to this article, when an octopus's arm has been chopped off, the arm displays behavior that is nearly identical to those exhibited when the octopus is intact. The article goes on to add that if the arms experience a single unified consciousness, then arm-based consciousness resembles the two minds split brain syndrome. We have seen someone online trying to teach an octopus to play the piano. This YouTuber heavily relied on a reward system and visual cues to get his pet octopus to press certain keys on a piano. Even then, the octopus didn't play anything particularly sophisticated. You will also notice that most of the time the octopus used 1 or 2 tentacles, and the others remained dormant. Overall, it was no different than when a chicken or a cat learned to play the piano with lasers. Gorillas, dolphins, whales, and parrots are typically the animals we have tried teaching to speak with or communicate with us humans. Coco's the most well-known gorilla who allegedly learned sign language and understood over 2,000 English words. Today, this experiment has been heavily scrutinized. An example would be this video. I will admit they lost me at the part where the author of the video was flippant about believing that we're made in the image of God, without first defining what the image of God actually is. And then he proceeded to promote intelligence as the trait that differentiates us from the animals. If you have watched my previous video, the image of God was defined by our unique intelligence, creativity, amongst other things, but that's a topic for another day. Alex, the African gray parrot, was another fascinating case. In my opinion, Alex was more convincing than the octopus and Coco. Alex was able to identify objects, shapes, numbers, and colors. This parrot was able to recognize himself in the mirror, and he asked what color were his feathers. In fact, Alex passed John Piaget's substage 6 of object permanence, which is used to measure a child's mental development, and also when it comes to symbolic thought. For example, when a child is learning to use his imagination, he will use a banana as a phone, and this was applied to Alex. Dr. Irene Pepperberg stated that Alex had the same intellectual capacity as a 5-year-old kid.
Sadly, Alex died at the age of 31. His last words to Dr. Pepperberg were, "You be good, see you tomorrow, I love you." He was found dead in his cage the next morning. Adding on to that, there's a popular clip on Instagram that have attributed the following. Before he died, Alex allegedly said, "What is happening? Where am I going?" There is no hard evidence this ever actually happened. Alex made frequent visits to the vet, and he would ask to be taken back home. So if this ever happened, it had more to do with him feeling distressed about going to the vet rather than having an existential question. But how can a bird like Alex be so smart with such a small brain, let alone be as smart as a 5-year-old?
Well, it's pretty simple. There is a region of the bird's brain called the pallium, which is the equivalent of the mammalian neocortex. The pallium functions as their prefrontal cortex and packs neurons at a high density. When it comes to humans, we've had people who were anomalies. Is Your Brain Really Necessary? Was published in 1980, in which Dr. John Lorber, a pediatrics professor at Sheffield University, discovered a brilliant math student with an unusually large head who had an IQ of 126. A CAT scan revealed that the student had virtually no brain. The student's brain matter was reduced in size because he had a condition called hydrocephalus. There has been some pushback on this, and some explanations have been proposed. For example, John Lorber's CAT scans didn't actually show that the student's brain matter was missing, but rather compacted into a small space, which means it was compressed into a higher density than your average brain tissue. Neuroplasticity is the credited reason why the student was still able to live a normal life despite missing 90% of his brain. So far, this is what we have. First, animals don't necessarily need a large brain to be smart. In fact, the cerebral cortex of a dolphin is 30% larger than a human brain. But that doesn't mean neuron density. Dolphins are yet to build an underground city or operate machinery, at least that we know of. Second, life is defined by the following criteria: cellular activity, metabolism, growth, adaptation, and responding to stimuli. Under these scientific terms, even a zygote is considered life because it meets their criteria. We recognize jellyfish as being alive for the same reason. Should they be granted rights? Some animals have special rights. For example, we have laws to regulate the treatment of animals considered to be livestock, such as cows, pigs, hogs, and horses. These laws dictate how animals shouldn't be confined in cruel ways. There's laws that prohibit us from making them fight each other, and laws on how we should transport them. Some countries don't have strict legal protection for the well-being of animals at all. Does that mean that because special rights are granted to some animals that it makes the other animals less valuable? As far-fetched as it sounds, in some states sacrificing a goat isn't necessarily illegal, as long as it's done humanely and for legitimate religious reasons. And if you're opposed to people practicing their religious freedoms on animals, let's remember that we eat burgers in this country, and Hindus consider cows to be sacred. Dogs are eaten in certain countries like China, and we flip out over the Yulin Dog Meat Festival.
But wait, we eat animals without their consent. And likewise, there's people out there who feel like they can sexually stimulate animals without their consent. Thankfully, we have laws out there against bestiality to protect these animals, which then follows. Why do we arbitrarily decide which animals are granted special rights and what we can and can't do to them?
As established earlier, adult birds like Alex took years to learn words, colors, and to respond to questions. Coco the gorilla also took many years. On the other hand, babies are considered to be linguistic geniuses because of their ability to learn languages simply by hearing. In fact, if you're able to, it's encouraged to speak to babies in more than one language, as they will have a cognitive advantage as they develop. We all possess this ability to absorb language like a sponge when we're infants, but we gradually lose that ability as adults. For a baby, it's a breeze due to their high brain plasticity.
I asked this early in the video and I'll ask it again. Is it ever okay to kill anyone or anything when they're not conscious? Would it be morally permissible to eat an encephaly baby during a famine? Or how about human flesh cloned in a laboratory? There's no conscience and sentience to worry about, so what would be the moral objection? Consciousness is the prime suspect, if you will. I can't prove to you the mind and consciousness are real. Some philosophers and neuroscientists argue that it's all an illusion. The funny thing is they use logic and reason, which are things we can't prove to be an objective truth, to debate the veracity of these claims about morality and consciousness. How about you demonstrate the veracity of your own mind and consciousness by commenting down below? I hope you have a great day and try not to be eaten.